Hi, I'm Justin,
And I'm Laura.
and this is Count Time. Thanks for joining us. Today, we have the executive director of a nonprofit here in Omaha called Rise. His name is Jeremy Bouman, and we're going to be interviewing him today. Well, just talking with him. We're not really interviewers. We're just a little more casual than that, as our listeners are well aware. So, Laura, do you have anything to add?
No, I just want to get into Jeremy and his background a bit. Jeremy, can you tell us about yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. Good to be with both of you. So I grew up in New York City, lived there until I was a young adult, and lived in Baltimore for a couple of years after that. I've been in Omaha now for just about 15 years. We moved right after our first child was born. When she was 6 months old, we went on a crazy adventure to Nebraska. I was working in higher education at the time and thought, yeah, this will be a good 3 year, stop in my life. And here we are with two kids now, 15 years later. Um, what was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
Just kind of what brought you here. So
Yeah,
education, it
yeah,
sounds like, yeah.
yeah. So I've worked in the private sector in New York, and kind of long story short, I ran a small internet business in New York City, and on September 11th, our infrastructure was in the Five World Trade Center. Our offices were 2 blocks south, and so that was a very, very difficult day and time in my life that really kind of vocationally shifted. Uh, I think my purpose and what I wanted to do. I started working for nonprofits right after that happened, and started seeking out much more purpose-driven work. So the last 20 years, I've worked for social service organizations and higher education institutions, and the last 5 years working, doing this role with Rise and the work we do both in the Nebraska prison system and in the
Right.
community for people that have been system impacted.
Mm, mm.
That's excellent. I mean, that's so cool to hear, how you could go from, you know, there's a lot of money in New York City. I moved out there when I graduated high school. I was there for about 10 years. Um, it's a phenomenal place. And to leave all of that to really do something that is purpose filled, like you said, like that just gives me goosebumps. That's so cool. I really, commend you on that. I mean, Omaha does have a way of trapping people here, but
Yeah,
It's the
we've
people. It's
really
easy to
loved
get
it.
sucked in. Yeah.
that's that's
It's been
what
a
it is.
been a great place to raise a family, and
Absolutely.
we fell in love with it. And it's been a great place to do the work that we do. You know, working in social services, you can uh, work really, really hard, and with how many people are in kind of greater New York City, you might be able to affect change for some individuals and their families. But what I love about doing this work in Nebraska is it's not so overwhelming in terms of size and scope. Where if you have really solution based programs and are intentional about what you're doing, you can really move the needle. You know, you could make incremental system change, and so that's what gets me out of bed every day, and why I love doing this work in Nebraska.
Wow.
That is incredible.
Yeah, it really is. Awesome. So, talking about Rise, how did it get started? What's your mission statement? And can you give us any statistics on the success rate?
Yeah, so our mission is to break generational cycles of incarceration. That's really the focus. We know the data around how many children follow parents into the system. I worked at Creighton University in Omaha for about 7 years. And during that time, I started volunteering at the Douglas County Jail, mentoring men who were pretrial. So I would meet for an hour a week with somebody for the entirety of their pretrial incarceration. And then they would either get released back to the community or they would get sentenced to prison. And then I would get a new assignment.
Mm.
So getting to know people in the system really kind of personalized it for me. I saw a lot of common themes around addiction and mental health, around generational incarceration of families, uh, people finding family in gangs, and
Mm.
seeing, and really a common theme was that most of the folks who had kind of cycled back into the system were unemployed. Their system, uh, being in the system, really narrowed their work opportunities. And I think the stat is 89% of people that reoffend don't have a job at the time that they reoffend. And so it's not a silver bullet, but if you have a livable wage job, you really see recidivism go down if people are able to provide for their families and get stable when they first get out, when they're paying for, court fees and ankle
Mhm.
monitors and transitional houses and any, God forbid, you had debt before you went in and you don't have credit when you get out. So, practical solutions, and giving people, tools and access to opportunities and networks really seem like something that really wasn't done very much in this space. So I was asked to start a national chapter of a group called Defy Ventures. They had uh, been using entrepreneurship and employment in some pretty innovative ways on the coasts. And Nebraska was the third state to bring the program. And I left Creighton to be the executive director of this chapter of Defy. We were attached to the national organization for just about a year. We ended up creating our own nonprofit. We rebranded as Rise. And so we've been doing the similar work for 5 years. We've been doing it as Rise for the last 4.
Mm. Wow.
Excellent.
That is wonderful.
And it's so cool to hear, because like when I went in, Rise didn't exist. There was nothing as far as I knew other than like Metro's reentry program and the various other small operations that are in town. But like having come out and then see what Rise has turned into in such a short amount of time and how much effect it has had on the community and the people that, they're my people, the people that I was locked up with, and so it's very cool to see that something like this could happen in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, we've grown very quickly. We started in 2 prisons. So our core program is a 6-month program pre-release that we teach and facilitate with curriculum that we created, focused on character development, reentry planning, doing a 20-page reentry plan,
Wow.
job readiness, and entrepreneurship. And our solution is an inside out one. So we get to work with people pre-release, and we do that in 7 prisons in Nebraska. And by getting to know people and understanding what their needs are, we are more equipped to help them when they come home. So they graduate the pre-release program, they get a certificate in workforce readiness from University of Nebraska Omaha's Business School.
Wow.
And we do a cap and gown graduation, and families come. We do a business pitch competition at the graduation. And once they're finished with that, our reentry team picks up and they begin working with our graduates once they're about a year out. And they stay with them, whether they go to work release or whether they mandatory discharge back to the community or parole. And then we have a whole host of programming and supports that come alongside people when they do come home. So we help with employment. We have a business academy where we help folks start small businesses. It's a 12-week program that meets Monday nights. We have a program for families, youth and families, trying to bring healing and restoration to families. So really listening to what the different needs are. And a lot of the growth has come to, responding to what we've been told are the supports that folks need when they come home.
Right.
So we've had 540 graduates of this pre-release program, and we have about 150 of our graduates are now back in the community. We have less than 6% go back on new charges. 90% are employed. Our average hourly wage is just a little under $16. So really trying to,
Excellent.
work on livable wage employment, which we're seeing, and having people connected to a healthy community, whether it's us or whether it's our alumni group of other Rise graduates that we have, weekly dinners with and, monthly family events, coming home to a pro-social healthy community
Yeah.
and having livable wage employment, it really makes a big difference.
Absolutely. Wow. That's incredible. Um, I so as far as like the you're basically creating a whole new ecosystem for these people. You know, like these people, I was a little bit different in my experience. Like I kind of went off on the wrong path on my own in my house. But as far as like people coming back into the community, they're, you know, like you said, they're coming back into the same exact environment that, you know, caused them to end up where they were. So I think that that's really great, just restructuring the entire community for them and then creating that community. I think that that's what a lot of people are looking for, is to feel accepted and to feel included.
Mhm.
Yeah, healthy community is really critical. When you kind of look at our logic model, one side of it is preparing people to be successful, giving them practical tools both pre and post release. The other side of that is preparing the community. And so we are a very community involved organization. Over the last 5 years, we've had 1,000 volunteers. Pre-pandemic, we were bringing groups of volunteers in, 30 or 40 at a time for coaching days, where they would review resumes and do mock interviewing, review personal statements, how people talk about their incarceration in a job interview, helping with business plans, judging pitch competitions. But most importantly, we were creating human connection, where people from the community would not just kind of have this kind of perspective of who's in prison and what they see on TV, but really learning about the lives of the people who are incarcerated, seeing how much you have in common. And that really builds empathy. And that
Yes.
empathy then leads to opportunity. If you come to understand how many people in our system have mental health issues or have been victims of crime in their own life, often at a young age, the amount of trauma that they have in their background, it really, I think, it shifts the perspective and it shifts the conversation.
Yeah.
Uh, and people feel safer, and they are more inclined to hire people or make a phone call on their behalf. So that community piece and using humanizing language when we talk about reentry is really critical to people having a real shot at success when they come home.
Yeah.
I really touch on what you just said as far as humanizing language. So that's something that we've been focusing on recently on the podcast, is just how, you know, for instance, when I was fresh out and I was going into interviews, you know, the number one thing that we're supposed to talk about, well, not supposed to talk about, but the very first thing that I would mention is my background. You know, I want to make sure that going into it, that we're not wasting our time. You know, like I want to be upfront about what's going to be in my background. Um, how do you prepare? Like, what is the language that you use? Like, what is something that you share with these people?
Yeah, so in terms of the humanizing language we use, our program participants, we call them builders, because they're
Okay.
building their lives, that they're in a period of rebuilding. Maybe they're building their business or their relationships.
Yeah.
So we give them a term that is positive and indicative of what stage they're at in their life. Um, in terms of, the language for interviews and things like that, we do encourage them to be upfront, but there's a way to do that that puts them in a good position to be successful, and that's their personal statement. So they can talk and kind of start it out where they're sharing the skills that they have to do the job, what their work background is. Most people that are incarcerated, they're working the whole time they're in prison. I think people see that gap and assume nothing's happening. They're gaining new skills, they're doing certifications, they're doing all kinds of programming, they're learning, they're doing different jobs. So we say, talk about those jobs and then share a little bit of context about your incarceration. And, but then where are you going? What you've learned these things, and this is who I am today, and this is why I'll be a good asset for your organization. So
Right.
it's kind of like I do with my wife, right? It's kind of good news, a little bit of bad news, and then the good
Sandwich
news at
it.
the end. You sandwich it a little bit.
Exactly.
But
Sandwich.
we've really found that if you're not upfront with it, it's been really, disheartening for people to get job offers, and when they've had to do hundreds of resumes and,
Yeah.
to get to the interview, and then when they actually get offered a job, on day one or right before, somebody says, actually, you don't have this job. And that's where that shame spiral starts, where, the self-talk starts going negative. And so we really encourage employers, like, if you hire people, hire people.
Yeah.
They have the skill set, you've decided they can do the job. Give them that chance. They're going to go through a wall for you. But if you're not going to hire them, don't hire them and then, say, hey, oh, by the way. That's where I feel for our people all the time, but that's where just that really kind of, can send people in the wrong direction, and they're all the things they're trying to do right.
So,
Because go ahead, Laura. Sorry.
no, you're fine. So do you think it would be beneficial to teach, say, HR personnel in larger corporations, but also small businesses, kind of normalizing what it's like, one, to interview someone who has served time previously, or their family members? This is not only affecting people who have served time themselves, but also their extended relations, right? Do you think that'd be beneficial for teaching that other side of the desk, kind of what to pay attention to, how to interpret different things if they can't speak to themselves interviewing? How do you feel that would that help, or do you think that it's more on?
I think it really helps.
Mm.
I think in one of the larger groups of volunteers that we bring into facilities are HR professionals. I think what a lot of times happens is they don't even know what questions to ask. So then they become a little bit intimidated, and there's probably somebody in the organization or a lawyer, saying, there's too much risk here.
Right.
But there's also fair chance hiring rules and laws that they need to follow. So it's a constant education, and we do a lot of work with HR professionals to really talk about, what kind of things they can ask. And we are proactive with the companies that we reach out to, where we'll be upfront and say, we're sending somebody your way and they're a graduate. We're trying to have that be a set apart, where HR professionals know, if I, am going to hire somebody in reentry and my company feels like this is some kind of a risk, we're telling you, if you hire a RISE graduate, they've done, this really intensive program pre-release where they were working 15 to 20 hours a week on it. They are really trying to change their life. Here's what their skill set is. And when you hire them, they have a RISE case manager that's going to be coming alongside them that can, speak into their life. There's trust there if there are any barriers that you run into. And that's not normal for any hiring, right? I wish when when we all hire people, we had like, oh, there's this buddy system where, you have somebody you can call if this doesn't work out.
Right. Yeah, that would be great.
So we want them to have a good initial experience hiring our graduates, where they get to a point where they want to, they're comfortable, and we can send more people to more employers and families. Like you said, I think if people don't know, they just don't know. I don't think it's always that they're opposed to it. They just don't know what to ask. They don't know what they should be thinking about. And we do a lot of educating. What does it mean when somebody's on parole?
Right.
If they have a job where they have to leave the state,
unless you've been involved in the system, you don't have any idea how it works. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about what you guys are doing, because what is so important is getting the conversation started and getting the community. Laura says at the end of our podcast, every episode, we're all your neighbors. And it's true, like your neighbors, you don't know where they've been and what they've been involved in. And so, like, for me, my family had no idea how to adjust to somebody who's in prison, or how to even deal with prison. It's a whole different kind of life, where you have to learn all these different things that you're not familiar with. And that's one thing I did say, in the beginning of our podcast, is a lot of people just don't understand because they don't know, and they don't have any experience with it. Unless you have a loved one that's gone through the system, or you yourself have gone through it, there would be no way that you would even have a clue what these people go through and the different things. I'm not saying that, that there shouldn't be consequences for our behavior, but at the same time, like, there's a lot of injustice in our criminal justice system,
Or
and it's very
or post system, trying to get back out and be constructive citizens. We have a lot of roadblocks that are put in our way if you re-enter into the rest of society, like we're told you're supposed to, and you're told you're being geared to do successfully. There's just a lot of roadblocks in between there, that aren't made for success. Yeah.
We frame it that reentry is crisis. You are in crisis when you're coming out of an institution that operates different than society, where you're needing to do things that people who are in the community struggled to do quickly: find a job quickly, find safe housing for yourself, begin dealing with debt, begin working on relationships. And, it's crisis in normal times. So the last 2 years, it's been off the charts, with the pandemic, and even more challenging. So the preparation and that plan that they do, that we're constantly updating with them, having that plan is just so critical. So they, are really tracking with, all the different components of what does success look like, right? Budget and identification and transportation, and if you're on supervision, what that looks like. Trying to navigate all of these conversations with potential employers. We have seen there's so many jobs in Nebraska right now. And so companies that we've been calling off the hook, they're finally like, hey, remember us? And, like, we remember we said no felony in 10 years. Well, we're rethinking that. So a job is a low bar for us. We don't want somebody to get out and make 10 or 11 or 12 bucks an hour. None of us can raise a family or live on that.
No.
So we're really seeking out what the chamber calls high skill, high wage, high need jobs, where you can come out starting kind of 16 to 19 an hour, where you can pay your rent, where you can begin to build up credit and do all of those things. And so now more than we've ever seen, companies are trying to get creative and say, how do we meet this workforce shortage that we have? People aren't flooding and moving to Nebraska. So how do we get creative? Well, we have 2,500 people every year that leave our prison system, many of which who have skilled work experience, or they got a CDL license while they were incarcerated, or welding, or whatever their gifts are. It would behoove us, if people care about public safety, they need to care about making sure that when people re-enter, they have livable wage opportunities and be a part of that solution too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Wonderful. Well, I know, and I spoke with someone, I have a career outside of the podcast. And when I spoke, I know, no, who knew?
Who knew?
But someone I spoke to in the hiring field talked about green rules. I don't know, do you speak much to green rules with your builders?
Green rules meaning like environmentally friendly, or?
How recently an offense was, or time served, was the relevancy to the job they're applying to, and how egregious was it? So if they committed a white collar crime, but they're trying to apply for a welding job, and it was 12 years ago that they had this offense, is it relevant? Is it recent? Is it egregious? Does it relate to what they're applying to? It should, unless it meets all three, it should not be taken into consideration. They should lean toward hiring, assuming that they are qualified, assuming they have any kind of, whatever the qualifications are for anyone else applying, do they meet them? Then the rest does not matter, that they have a record of some kind. So I know there are some companies that are national, even global, that are looking more to that and taking it more seriously. I do think that's a more recent development, but I was very happy to hear that. And I wondered if you had any experience with any of your builders coming across that.
Yeah, I didn't know the term, but we certainly, talk about, do they have the minimum skill set that you're looking for to do the role? And in many cases, they have more than the minimum skill set. They have, other experiences that lend to it. There's a lot of conversation, we're always trying to educate and change conversations around, how long somebody was incarcerated. And we work in the prison system in Nebraska, and it's all state prisons, and we don't right now serve the jail population. So the people we serve, I think 80% it's violent crime. It's often of charges that were when somebody was like 17, 18, 19, 20, not yet an adult. And you get a lot of time for violent crime. So if you're 30, 40, or 50, it's typically their violent crime might be 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. And they're adults now, right? We don't have mature brains till we're 25, and violent crime is not habitual. It's usually people that it's a lot of it is related to gangs. So there's a lot of education around, yes, it's a violent crime, but the context of it, is this is 20 years ago, and an 18-year-old who has not had a misconduct report for the last 15 years of their incarceration, who's a leader in the facilities,
right,
who has been holding a job in the shops. And that's where, there's still a lot of stigma, particularly around violent crime, that I think we have a lot of work to do.
And I think it's important to speak to also violent crime as a category. So there are some things that are classified as a violent crime, and on their record, that's what it says. But people in the outside world, I should say, I wish I had a better term, we wouldn't classify that as a violent crime. So that's something else to consider too. Just because it meets a categorization doesn't necessarily mean you need to be worried about there being a violent act against somebody else necessarily.
Yeah, if you have a loud fight with a loved one, it's that's categorized as a terroristic threat.
Right.
When I hear
you can never
terroristic
lay hands on
threat,
them.
I
Right.
think of somebody with a bomb, and but this is just kind of that's not
years for that. You can get years for that. So
Not that it shouldn't be taken seriously. It definitely should.
absolutely.
As
But
a
it's
caveat.
it's a really broad label
Yes.
that I don't know how some of the sentencing laws and how some of the charges truly reflect what happened. So you're always going to go to the worst case scenario of
right.
of what the situation is, and that becomes a really, really big stigma for people.
Well, I think, Jeremy, that like the people that are leaders in our judicial system, in our criminal justice system, are often so overworked as well, and so just inundated with person after person, this guy recidivates, this guy like I think it's really easy to become desensitized and sometimes demoralized, and I think that even focusing on them to a certain degree, and trying to increase empathy, kind of like give them a chance to like express where they're coming from too. And I think if it was it's hard for me to put this into words. I just think that people get so bogged down with the same thing every day, and it's just a revolving door that you sometimes just become hopeless, and then you're just mechanical with the way that you do things. And so I think that the biggest thing is this: one size does not fit all, in this situation. So
no, it gets hopeless on both sides. You're right.
yeah.
And you take a state like Nebraska that, in terms of number of people incarcerated, there's 5,600. But in terms of people to beds, we just surpassed Alabama as the most crowded prison system in the United States.
Wow.
So we're number one in the country. And when you talk about, staff burnout, you look at the last couple of years and kind of the Great Resignation. And at one point earlier this year, there were 680 staff openings for, state corrections, which is about 33% of their staff. So you're the most overcrowded, and you have this huge staffing crisis. And so what ends up happening is, programming gets taken away. There's a lot of lockdowns, and there's facilities where people are, in their cell Thursday night until Monday morning, because they just can't staff what to do. So the state has increased the hourly wage for corrections officers. You're starting to see that start to tick up again in terms of the crisis level. But yeah, there's a lot of other ways to make that same hourly wage, where you're not in harm's way, where you're not doing, mandatory overtime because of the staffing shortages.
Right.
So it just creates um, you know, a really a public health issue,
Yeah.
it's obviously a social justice issue, but it's people aren't healthy, and
Yeah.
that includes both the people who are incarcerated and the people working in
I
the system.
say that if you're working for 20 years in a correctional institution, you are also institutionalized, to a certain degree. So
Yeah,
But I
without a
love that
doubt.
you're talking to both of those sides. That's so important. And I think it's so easy to be biased. I have my own biases. So it's so easy to fall into that and just think, oh, well, this is wrong, or this is right, or deserved, not deserved. Um, but you're really taking a holistic approach. You're talking about jobs, recidivism, you're talking about families and community as a whole. And I think that's absolutely amazing. And that really sets you apart from other organizations and other programming options. I know my grandfather has spoken to me about programming options, and
Yeah.
he loves yours. Can't say enough wonderful things about
Oh,
it.
good.
Yes, but that's not reciprocated with the other organizations. So it was really interesting to get his take on it. But
Hmm.
I really appreciate all the work you guys are doing, and you're making a lasting impact. You're not just saying, okay, here's a book, read it, and good luck. Hopefully it works on the other side.
fill
You're
out this one.
really, what was
Yeah,
that?
the
I said,
curriculum
yeah,
is
fill out.
not the answer. It's
Right.
part of it. Yeah, it's really the character development stuff we do is the most important part of the program. It's
Mhm.
the stuff we do around shame and forgiveness and how to make a meaningful apology and parenting. And
Mhm.
we call it kind of the inside work that creates kind of a foundation for how you deal with conflict. And I think the people closest to the problem always have the solutions. And I
Right.
think what we've done well is, 60% of our staff are formerly incarcerated, many of which have graduated our program. All but one of our case managers has navigated their own reentry and or their own addiction. We have over 100 years of prison time on our staff. So they really have the solutions. They know what we should
Mhm.
be teaching. They know what people need because they've been there.
Right.
And so we really make a point of letting them lead in our organization and dictate how we go about the work that we do. So their lived experiences has so much value to what we are.
Truly, truly. So how can we help guide our listeners to get involved and help you guys out? How can we help?
Yeah, so we're a nonprofit here in Nebraska. So we are mostly privately funded, which means every year we have to raise money from individuals and companies and foundations. So, every nonprofit needs to raise more money, right? To be able to continue to serve
Yep.
their mission. And we're no different than that. We rely on philanthropy to meet our budget and to do the work we do. And we also use a lot of volunteers. We have volunteer opportunities locally where we're bringing people into facilities or people are mentoring people post release. We also, during the pandemic, started doing um, virtual volunteering. So people in the program were turning in their deliverables on their resumes and cover letters and their business plans. And then we had people who were quarantining at home able to download those from a Google Drive and provide feedback. And that opened up opportunities where we had volunteers from 26 states and I think
Wow.
5 countries last year. So um,
Wow.
there's literally, wherever people are listening to this, there are ways to, tangibly get involved and contribute to, helping folks navigate their incarceration and their reentry.
Mhm.
So we're at seeusrise.org, SEEUSRISE, seeusrise.org. And you can donate. You can find all of our upcoming volunteer opportunities, both in person and virtual. So yeah, we'll take all the help we can get.
Wonderful. Yeah, we have you linked in our webpage, so you guys can hit our friends and support page and go right direct to that. So check out their volunteering opportunities, their donation opportunities. It's so appreciated and makes such a huge impact. So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, we
Thank
are so grateful to have you on. Thank you so much for meeting with us.
Oh, it was great to be with you both. I appreciate your podcast and getting the word out and educating people. I think that's great.
Thank you, Jeremy.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Awesome. Well, thank
All
you.
right.
We'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye-bye.